Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Fangirl Friday. We are working through some funny Zoom technical issues here, but we are here together with Stu Levy. Thank you so much from Tokyopop.
Thank you, Nita.
This is Fangirl Consulting and Brand Management. That is our company. I am Anita Castellar, and I have weekly sessions where I invite my friends, colleagues, and sometimes my family to join me to talk about fandom, the business behind fandom, licensing. And this week we have Stu here from Tokyopop to talk about content creation and specifically around manga. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure, yeah, thanks. So first of all, thanks so much to Fangirl and Anita for having me on. I know it's strange, but this is actually my first ever kind of Zoom live stream Corona lockdown thing. I know that I actually last week, I'm supposed to be talking about myself, but I'll say that last week I did my first digital conference. It was an animation conference that we were supposed to have in Europe, and I was going to be there in person and, do the thing like you do at these markets, these conferences. And of course, Corona happened, and so they made it digital. And so I did my first digital conference, and I had maybe about 15 about 15 Zoom meetings, one-on-one meetings with different animation producers. And it was actually pretty cool, but it's just not the same. You want to be with people, you want to have coffee, you want to have a drink, you want to do, it's nice because you're focused, but it can't replace, face to face.
No, it really can. And, even though we're doing these, I really started this for a couple of reasons. One is to kind of educate a little bit on some questions. A lot of people ask me common questions over and over again around fandom and doing business within, the world of fandom and just all of it together. But really, it's also about kind of pushing out information and content and connecting with different people. So we're all trying new things. We're in a new normal and we're all just trying and learning at the same time.
Yeah.
So I think it's fun.
And it is really convenient. I think I've listened to a number of Zoom conferences and I can turn it on one side of the room. I could do work on the other, it's that part I think is pretty convenient. I like all the panels. I like the seminars, the different things that are happening. I think education will really be, I don't know if disrupted is the right word, but I do believe it's going to evolve pretty rapidly into not having to necessarily be at college physically in a place and being able to learn and get degrees and, just education, I think will really change from this stuff.
Well, I think, like you said earlier, though, I don't think this can never replace the actual interaction, right, with people and that human connection that you might have. And it's similar like at fan conventions, where people go for that interaction, they go for that sense of community and getting to know new people and such like that. And you can get to know a few people. Sometimes, though, I feel like it's one way, right? Like I'm just pushing, but I love to have that back and forth. So, have you been to many fan conventions in your life?
Oh my God. I have to say though, because I've been in the industry for so long, I was so young when I started in the industry. I've only been to Comic-Con. I've been to, how many Comic-Cons have I been to? Definitely 20.
Wow.
And I've never went as a fan because like I said, I was so young when I started working that my very first Comic-Con was as a tiny little, it was crazy way back in the day. It was such a small little convention. And, I remember we had no money. So what we did is we literally went to the beach in San Diego. We got a bunch of sand. We had buckets. We put buckets of sand in our booth, in our tiny little 10 by 10 booth. We had beach chairs, a little pool that we filled up with water, just like a little plastic swimming pool. And we handed out copies of our very first manga magazine while wading our feet in the swimming pool on beach chairs on the sand.
It's pretty fun.
It was fun, and it cost us no money at all to do this. You couldn't do that nowadays. Of course, it's the big union event, and you couldn't just drag in a bunch of sand. But yeah, I'm old and I've been around for a long time, and I've been to many, many, many conventions.
Young at heart.
Conventions. Young at heart. Yeah, I try to pretend that I'm young, and I don't necessarily pull it off, but I try. And the people around me, the fans, my teammates, they're a lot younger than me, and I learned from them tons of stuff. And I've always loved technology, so for me, I don't have any like technophobia. So it's very easy for me to. And I'm not a baby boomer. I'm actually Gen X. So I think Gen Xers are a little bit, nobody really talks about us at all. We're the lost generation, which is fine with us. We always
getting
were.
Squeezed in the middle somewhere.
Yeah, the millennials and the baby boomers, like you two fight it out, and we're just gonna like chill. That's Gen X. But back to your original question about a little bit about me and my company. I founded Tokyopop about 22 years ago, 23 years ago. And we our kind of claim to fame is that we brought manga, Japanese manga, to the United States and popularized it in English language. And at the time, there was maybe one or two Japanese mangas that I didn't even know about, but they weren't distributed. You couldn't go into a bookstore and buy manga. And what we did is we built out that distribution. It was hard. We paid our dues many, many times over, and we built a category that influenced a bunch of fans around the world, around the US, to learn about Japanese culture and be introduced to manga as a medium. Anime in parallel was happening. So there were a number of companies. That was the first generation of anime companies. And so we were on the manga side doing books, and then our colleagues on the animation side were doing anime. And I think that first wave of Japanese pop culture that we were involved in influenced so many people. Sailor Moon was probably our most famous property back in the day. And then we built out a successful business, and I think kind of established the category, and then got hit really hard by the recession and piracy and a number of things which pretty much destroyed the market share we had built. And then we were out of the business in the US for a few years, but continuing in Europe. And then a few years back, I restarted the company in the US. We're much more boutique now, but we've done film, we've done television, we've done animation, we've done music, all kinds of things at Tokyopop.
Wow, that's a lot. It's quite broad in skill set, but also like touching on different types of fans.
Yeah, it was really all about what was cool in Japan, what was cool in Asia, that me and my team that we liked, that we felt we wanted to introduce to people in the United States and in Europe. And we would go and we would try to be involved in the different pop culture that we fell in love with. And we did that in different ways. Sometimes we had even a magazine that was more editorial where we covered things. Once the internet hit and really, really took off, there was a lot of ways information could flow. And I think our role in that sense became more diminished. But back then, it was hard for people to get access to information about Japan.
Right.
And so we were a bridge.
So were you always a fan of Japanese culture, anime, films and such, and that's what led to Tokyopop being founded? Or number one, I guess I'm asking, what are some of your fandoms? And then number two, how did you get to Tokyopop?
Got it. So yes, I went to Japan before I knew about anime, even though when I was a little kid, my generation, we grew up with Speed Racer and that era of stuff that was not really a wave of Japanese pop culture, but kind of one-off shows.
Yeah.
That, Astro Boy or whatever was brought to America in some random way. And then when I was in college, sushi was just starting in America, and I fell in love with sushi, absolutely fell in love with it. And also Korean food. My neighbors were Korean, and so I grew up in Los Angeles basically eating Korean food, and I decided I wanted to go to Asia. And when I had the opportunity to study abroad, I decided to study in Japan and visit Korea, which I did. And when I was there, I stayed with a family, and the family would watch every night on television Dragon Ball.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, the little kids, they were huge Dragon Ball fans, so I got completely addicted. And every night as a family, we'd be eating dinner and watching Dragon Ball at the same time, which I have a kid now, and I'm definitely not going to be showing my kid cartoon over dinner. I don't think that's the proper way to raise your children. But we loved it. And
Yeah.
really did that. So I really love Dragon Ball. Another a designer friend of mine introduced me to a manga called Slam Dunk, which never really took off in the United States, but it was a manga based on basketball. Mm-hmm. And I was a pretty big basketball fan, so I ate it up. I loved it. I read every single copy of the book. I fell in love with this thing called Parasite, which ultimately we got the rights and published at Tokyopop. So I was geeking out on a lot of Japanese culture and pop culture first. But when I grew up, when I was a kid, I was into some of the things that I was hardcore about was D&D, for instance. I was in that first generation of D&D addicts. I know now it's cool again, and I have not
come full circle.
It has come full circle, but when I was in junior high school, we would play pretty much every day after school. We loved it. And we did other things like the Rubik's Cube came out, and we were all geeks trying to beat each other in the Rubik's Cube time. And there was a lot of stuff that was kind of the first generation of geek culture then that ultimately became, mainstream, 10, 20 years later. And then I was a huge music and film fan, a very, very hardcore music fan. And definitely that was kind of my biggest thing. I went to concerts all the time. I didn't have a lot of money, so me and my buddies, we'd sneak in. We hustled. We would, buy and sell tickets. We'd anybody got any extras? We'd buy extras for cheap, and then we'd sell them. So we were doing whatever we could. In LA, we would go to gigs all the time.
Any particular type of music, like a genre or a band?
Everything from reggae, like from reggae to, I remember seeing Prince when he launched Purple Rain. We snuck into this little party, and he played at the Hollywood, the Palace was the name of the club at the time. Yeah, and we were there, and we got to see him. I liked Frank Sinatra. I liked rock. I liked punk rock. I liked R&B. I mean, really, Luther Vandross. I was in the first row. There was just so many amazing concerts in LA, and very broad range of music that I personally liked.
So you feel like that all influenced your journey towards finding the company and starting the company?
Yeah, pop culture overall is such a pleasure. It's really, I guess in our world where we have so many very stressful moments, if we can't have something that we truly enjoy, like inside of us as a passion, then what is life for, And so I think what makes us human is being able to express ourselves, being able to, whether that's appreciation for somebody else's expressions or our own expressions, being able to communicate about things that aren't necessarily the basics of life, but can allow you to imagine, can allow you to be inspired. And for me, that's always been what pop culture has been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a common thread to that, where we were talking about that last week as well, where, with Sean Fraser, from the Coop, but we were talking about passion, and also licensed goods, has been also kind of like that common thread where it becomes more like a tool to be able to express yourself, right? So you have a wink or a nod, basically, you have a t-shirt on, and you have a hat or something that if you know what that is, and you're across the room, you kind of connect with that person. And if you don't, then, it's just a cool design, right? And there's nothing to it, but it builds that signaling of like who I am, what I'm about, what are my interests, without having to really speak. But somebody else could catch that signal, if they're in tune to it.
Yeah, and I think that has really, really expanded and gone a lot deeper than when we were kids. Now if you look at the range of, from cosplay to, there's just so many ways that fans can express themselves and, like you said, connect and be part of the community. I mean, growing up, we did that, definitely. And in my case, because music was my big thing, I remember for a while we were into a scene called mod. And it was pretty stupid when you think about it, but we we were fans of these groups that came from the UK, like Madness and the Specials and the English Beat, and you probably never heard of any of these groups.
None of those. No, I haven't heard of those.
No, the Jam was another one, but there was this range of music that was kind of like part reggae. There was reggae, there was ska, and there was this thing called mod, which was like a type of rock that originated from The Who, the group The Who.
Okay.
And then ultimately then the Jam and some others. But basically they did these things. They wore, people would wear trench coats, and then you would have these little buttons that you collected of all your favorite groups, and then like little things. And so I remember, and patches was another thing. And so we'd have these trench coats with all these patches and buttons, and we'd go to the club and we would go dancing, and there was a certain type of dance style they called skanking, and we would do it. And when you saw another mod, you know, you knew, oh, like you're into it, and people would, you know, they'd greet each other, be like, what's up? Even if you didn't know each other, just because you knew you were into that scene. And I think that has really, really expanded into so many types of scenes across pop culture. Of course, geek culture being a big part of it, but all types of pop culture, really.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, how a lot of that has to do with the stories that are being told as well, right? Because you have to take something, people connect to something, and you guys are all about storytelling and, of course, in manga, right? So, you know, what are those types of, or I guess I should say, how do you choose the stories to tell? How do you land on what you think might be a great, you know, manga or a series or a character? How do you land on all of that?
Well, I think a lot of it, frankly, comes down to the characters. You know, certainly people, when they are interested in stories, I think in general, it seems like it's about the plot, but most of the time it's not. There's some exceptions to that. But generally, I have this theory called the CCW, which is character, concept, world. And those are the three parts of a story, of a franchise, that are particularly important. And what I describe it, I have a kind of a master class that I even teach a little bit around this concept, but character, concept, and world are really who is the character or multiple characters inside a story, and how are they relatable to the audience? How does the audience interact with these characters? How do you feel attracted to that character? What's unique about that character? Concept is kind of just the overarching theme or sort of twist that is unique about a particular story. So not the plot. The plot is like beat by beat by beat. You know, a character walked down the street and then somebody hit him on the head and they got in a fight and blah, 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 blah. That's the plot. But the concept is, you know, a young boy finds out that he has magical powers and ends up in a world that he didn't even know existed. You know,
so like the essence
that's kind of
the story.
The essence, yeah. The real heart of it. And then the world is the actual world that it's set in. So that can be a modern world, that can be a very closed world, that can be outer space, it can be big or small. But is that world compelling and interesting? Is that concept unique and fresh? Are those characters relatable and attractive? And if you have all three of those things in CCW, you have a hit franchise.
So is that lightning in a bottle, or is that something that you can constantly recreate? It sounds like it's something that should be the pillar of developing any type of project, right? It
is definitely so. So Tokyopop and myself, we acquire a lot of IP that is existing, and we evaluate it, and we also create IP too. And when you're either instance, whether you're evaluating or whether you're creating, to me, CCW is a matrix, a framework where you can evaluate IP and when you and also create IP. But that does not mean that just because you intend to knock it out of the park in these three areas, that doesn't mean you can execute that.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
what would prohibit you from executing it?
I don't think it's that you are prohibited necessarily. I think it's that it ultimately, things become derivative and redundant whether you intend them to or not. So when you're working on a story, there's only so many stories that can be told. And how do you avoid, I think what happens a lot of the times is, and just think about, as a fan, when you're watching something or reading something and you go, this is just like blah, blah, blah. Things always can feel too familiar. So what makes them fresh? What makes them new? What makes them stand out? And trying to create something that is truly unique and will resonate with an audience and will click, and I mean, we can just name tons and tons of successes, and we could also name probably 1,000 more failures, or 1,000,000 more failures. But like lately, I think of something like Stranger Things. Stranger Things was supposedly pitched to pretty much everybody in town, and they passed each time. What makes something like Stranger Things, when you think about it, it doesn't seem so fresh on paper because of the 80s, because of Goonies, because of so many things that are similar. But then when you watch it, it's super compelling, and that's execution. And how do you get that execution? How do you take your CCW and make it really work? I think that's what the magic is.
Yeah. So I think we actually have a question.
Oh, okay.
So this one's from Ticket to the Moon. How are you dealing with the competition from Webtoons and other companies like them?
So how are you dealing with the competition from Webtoons and companies like them?
So first, we are huge fans of Webtoon and Webtoons in general. Like, we don't think that a medium or a platform that can distribute and can connect fans worldwide is ever a bad thing. We think it's wonderful. We think the more places like Webtoons that exist, the better. And frankly, we're pretty seriously interested in putting out our content on Webtoon and creating manga content in a Webtoon style format. So vertical scrolling, full color, working on your phone. I've watched a lot of markets like in China and Korea and Japan, and I've seen how the generational shift goes from traditional reading of manga, where it's black and white, it's on the page, you're going here, and then over, and here, and over, to on the phone where you're going down and trying to squeeze a manga created for the page onto a phone and experience that. There is something very unnatural about that. And you can do it. I do it. I read on my phone, but it's much more enjoyable experience when the medium is native and the content is native. So when you look at a Webtoon and when you're scrolling, and I have like my favorite Webtoon style platform is actually a Chinese platform called QuaiCon. QuaiCon manhua. Manhua is what they make in China. The manhua on QuaiCon are fantastic. They're so good. But we love it. We think Webtoon's awesome, and we hope to be involved in that space in a way where we can contribute something.
I think we have another question.
So here's a question from Masked Republic.
Back
in the early 2000s, you distributed FMW Wrestling from Japan.
Yes, we did.
How did that deal come together? And looking back, what are your thoughts on the decision?
So distributed.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So you heard the whole thing. Perfect. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can hear the whole thing. Did the audience hear the whole thing too then? Or I guess they must have heard it too.
They should have heard it.
Yeah. Okay. FMW, Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling. That's actually, first of all, thank you for remembering that. That was I was very personally involved in that, and have some memories, both wonderful memories and also very tragic, sad memories about that group and those people, those wrestlers. They were just amazing people. And did anybody watch the movie some years back called The Wrestler?
I heard it was
You know the
amazing. I
one I'm
actually haven't
talking
seen it
about?
yet. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was with I'm kind of blanking. It's what's that guy's name? Mickey Rourke.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mickey
It
Rourke
was
was
Mickey
the
Rourke. Yeah.
star of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that movie really reminded me of my experiences with FMW because they took me in as kind of one of their own. They really embraced me, and it was such a challenging business for the people, the people that ran it and the wrestlers. They had no money, they had no budget. It's not like our leagues out here. It's not like WWE or anything like that. It really they would play in small arenas. They would just hustle to try to make some money. They would stay backstage and with no fancy, they were just sitting on the ground and eating bento for lunch. They trained. I mean, it was not a glamorous living at all. It was 18-hour days of just killing themselves to get good at this sport, and then get on a stage with maybe 1,000 fans in the audience. And it was hard work for these guys, and they were super nice. And some tragedy really hit that league. Onizuka, the star at the time that we were involved, and he had this great move where he would go on the top of his of the ring on the ropes, and then he would do this flip. And I'm sorry, it's Hayabusa. It's not Onizuka. My bad.
Okay.
Hayabusa, and Hayabusa would do this flip, and he would come down and he would land and kind of crush the leg of his opponent. And obviously these are practice moves, but they're super hard to do.
They're high risk.
And they're high risk. And this guy ended up, and this was after we were involved, he ended up landing in a weird way and paralyzed himself from the neck down. Oh. Literally. It's the most tragic thing. And then the guy who ran the league, Sato-san, he was a young guy that started as an intern. And then when Onita, the guy who ran the league, he was the most famous guy, and he left the league kind of in the dumps to go become a politician. And the wrestlers all decided, let's try to take it over, but nobody knew how to do business. And they told this intern kid, you run the business. And he's like, me? And he had to somehow figure out how to do it. He came to me once and he said, we're in major debt. I don't know what to do. And we had this long 2-hour Korean barbecue in Japan, and he was crying. I mean, it was just so heartbreaking. And I told him, you should probably, frankly, bankrupt the company, go file bankruptcy, because you owe so much money. It doesn't sound like it's a good situation. And about a year after that, they found that he hung himself in the park. This was just tragic stuff. But the guys were so wonderful. They came out to the U.S. We did wrestling events in LA. We had an event at Ep.3 at the time. We had a booth, and we put out obviously VHS tapes and DVDs back when that was the medium, and worked really hard with these guys. What is this? Oh.
Technical.
Came up on my screen. And I don't know, I loved what they did, and they had, I mean, just they did, and a lot of the stuff that it was really tough sports. It was athletics. It wasn't just all fake. It was, and they bled and they hurt themselves and they tried, and it was a great show. They had these cages and barbed wire. And
I get this kind of like the not to belittle that, but it's really like that blood, sweat, and tears that you put into anything that you're really passionate about, right? Like if that's your media, right, is wrestling, and your character development, and your costuming and the way you portray yourself. But yet, if it's I'm making it up, you're an animator or things like that, really, honing your craft, whatever that is, and you got to pay your dues sometimes.
And that's what athletes do. And I think it's kind of like Broadway in a way, something like wrestling, because you have athletics, you have the physical challenge of it, and then you have, like you said, this performance, this, your craft, and it's a combination of those two things. So it's super challenging to be a successful wrestler. And I think a number of people don't give it credit because they say it's fake, but honestly, it's double hard because you have to perform both as an athlete and as kind of an actor.
Right.
and I'm not like a wrestling expert, but I just fell in love with the league and was so happy to be involved, and proud that we were able to bring it to the US.
Well, maybe you'll connect with Mass Republic on their on their
Yeah, Master
things.
Public. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope we tried our best. It wasn't easy, but we had a great time, and they're a great league. And like I said, my heart bleeds so much for the tragedy that those guys have been involved in. Yeah.
So I think we have another question.
Yeah, another question.
Okay.
But jumping off of this topic.
So,
or kind of away from this topic, actually. But from Riley, do you plan on publishing artists in the near future, like how Rising Stars of Mango was?
So, great question. We have recently we have a number of wonderful artists that we've published through a line called International Women of Manga. And this has been focused on global manga creators that happen to be female. And I think we have about 8 super talented women that we've put out through this line. It's funny that you mentioned Rising Stars of Manga, because we have spoken a lot about should we relaunch that brand. There was so much talent that came out of that process, those competitions. I know Webtoon does a great competition, and I think Medibang does a good competition too. I think Tokyopop can do a competition at some point. We definitely don't have the finances that we had back in the day, so we have to be really careful with what we can do. But if people think there is an interest if artists would like to see that kind of thing, I think it would be fun and great to do, and a sort of Rising Stars for today's world.
I think it's interesting because, especially since you mentioned women, right? And there's been discussions around, more representation, not just of women, but of multiple types of, representation,
Sure.
within content creation, whether it be in film or in video games or, writing or manga, pop culture in general.
Yes.
There's always that discussion that's been happening lately, and you see it more and more often. So I think it's timely, right? But it's like, how do you execute? Kind of going back to like whatever the story is, and how do you execute that story? And if you start small, but then you grow it, maybe it doesn't take a lot, but it could have a big impact.
I mean, this is, and I don't want to, continue to talk about Webtoon over and over, but I love what they've contributed to the world of sequential art, the world of comics, because they do encourage many artists to go out and reach people, just like Wattpad in the fiction world does. These platforms where you can create a story and then 1 million people around the world can end up reading it. It may not make a lot of money because, as we know, it's very hard to monetize content, especially as an independent creator, but even as an independent studio like ours, monetizing content's not easy in today's world, but reaching people and influencing people is much easier than it was back in the day.
Yeah, because the internet has made everything so accessible, right? So that the reach can be there as long as you can connect the people to the actual content. That's the tricky part.
That's right. That's the tricky part. I mean, there's a lot of competition. Everybody can basically, put out whatever they have. But I do believe that, as you mentioned, representation, I think that technology has helped that a lot. That back when it was only gatekeepers, it was very, very hard to break in. And now it's still hard. Don't get me wrong. There's huge challenges that still must be overcome. But I love the fact that anybody in the world can put something on Webtoon or put something on Wattpad, and it can work and it can resonate. And then they can have this massive hit. Yeah. And then somebody might pick it up and put it out as a movie, or create an animation. That dream is being made more and more realistic.
So speaking of monetization though, because like, how does that happen, right? You have to keep a company going. So obviously funds need to be generated. What's that business model look like?
To Tokyopop, where we're very boutique, and we're not part of a big media company. We just do our best as a team of people that believes in what we're doing. We don't our salaries are very low. We watch our costs. In fact, Corona has actually encouraged us to become a virtual company. So since we've been working from home now for 2 months, we've decided, let's just not have an office. Let's just continue working from home. It will save us time in commuting. It will allow us to work with people around the world. And we can always gather. We can, have a meeting once a week, once a month. We can do different things like that. But let's be a virtual company. Why bother having an office?
Right.
And I think that type of mentality is that you have to really sort of think like guerrilla warfare as a content creator or a small content studio. You have to think, we're going to just watch our overhead. We're going to keep things affordable, and we're going to just keep trying. And if something breaks, then it's still like a Netflix deal or a this or that. But at the same time, I think there's ways that you can create merchandising programs, and you can, I think there's a lot of new service-oriented digital companies that you can have a whole bunch of t-shirts made, and you don't have to buy the t-shirts.
Right.
You don't have to
the
keep
print
your
on
stock.
demand type stuff.
Print on demand, the red button, that type of thing. And I think you can, as a creator, as a content creator, you can build up a fandom, and you can have your fandom help support you. I think music really nails that. I think the people in the music business who, especially like hip hop artists, they really know how to do that.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that the normal, quote unquote, normal business model is, you create a piece of content, whether you licensed it, whether you acquired it from a different studio and then you created something new, or you created your own original, but you created a piece of content, you either publish it on a physical version, which, by the way, I still have my very nice exclusive, oh, I can see it here. There we go.
Oh, you have 0. Awesome.
These virtual backgrounds are tricky, but so you create a piece of background or a piece of content. You kind of distribute it out. When you distribute it, you're probably selling it to a publishing distribution person who then sells it again, like a wholesaler, right? Who gets into retail at some point, and then it's bought by the fans or the consumers then. Like, I would say that that's the normal business model, right? But now it's like everything is upended. And how do we think about the future?
I mean, I think that frankly, a lot of what the content business is becoming and needs to become is what they call direct to consumer. So working with your fans. So that may be, and it may not be massive. It may not be, 20 million fans. That's okay. You may have 5,000 people or 30,000 people or 200,000 people that support you, and they're your core fan base, and working with them, and not just, hey, we're making something, please buy it. I don't think that that's what the relationship is about. I think we've got some ideas creatively that, and in the past, you guys have liked what we do. What do you guys think about this? And having kind of like a give and take. And I've got some ideas on what to do next in that area, like even working with Japanese manga. How do we work with our fans to find opportunities for the fans to enjoy something, and for us to also be able to bring something over, create something where we're able to connect together? And I guess in a way, there was like the whole Kickstarter crowdfunding trend, which did well, but also has its challenges. It's a little bit like that, but not exactly like that. I feel like there's also, with the OTT platforms, so Disney with Disney Plus or Warner with HBO Max, like whether it's big media or individual content creators like Patreon, big or small, how do you connect with your fans, and how do you create a relationship where it's symbiotic? They support you, and you support, and you deliver to them. It's something that is wanted on both sides. I think that's really what the content business will be, and already is becoming.
Well, even in merchandise, like physical goods and stuff like that, it's kind of sounds like a lot more often we're having to take the goods straight to the fans, right? Straight to the consumers, because and bypass these channels that have been put in place for so long, and almost plow our own field and figure out our own way, because sometimes I've been involved in projects, in toy development or what have you, where there was a great idea, but because a certain particular retailer didn't pick it up, the idea died. The toy never got created because this particular retailer just didn't want to pay the cost or didn't want to commit to the manufacturing quantities required or whatever was the case, and so there are so many times where I've seen great ideas just kind of die away because the gatekeepers, said no, or the powers that be said no.
That's right. Like the whole thing, like if it's not a TV show or if it's not, doesn't have the media exposure, we won't take it on. And I think talking about retail real quickly, because I do think that retail and shops have a very important role, but that role is the successful retailers, the ones that are already doing well and will do even better in the future, are retailers that, again, have a very, very close and I guess I'm thinking kind of subjective or a relationship with their customers that is almost customizable. It's not, it's like they know their customer and their customer knows them. It's not like,
almost a personal relationship.
It really is. It really is. It's a community. And I don't think, and I don't want to, I'm trying to bash Walmart or Target, but I don't think that that type of retailer is not the right retailer for pop culture, in my opinion.
I think there are pieces of it that can live there, but no, I don't.
Sure.
And the thing is that it's also on the spectrum of fandom. I call it the spectrum of fandom, where you're in-depth, hardcore, fan of a certain property or specific properties. And then there's all the way the range, all the way to casual fan. I dip in and out. I just might have a t-shirt or whatever, type of thing. And so I think there are types of products that we offer for each of those types of consumers, but then we also have the shopping experience that goes with each type of consumer as well, where they want it easily accessible. They'd only want a little bit. And so, maybe a Walmart or a Target is a place for them to go, and that's perfectly fine. But if you want, issue number 5 of whatever it is that you're looking for, you're not going to get it there, right? And part of the thing about collector communities and fans and such like that is also the hunt, and the aftermarket, aspect of it, and where can I find it? And so that's a lot of times where you have to go and treasure hunt in a different place. And sometimes, and there are locations for that. There are fewer and fewer of them, but there are places like that. And sometimes you find a whole aftermarket places at fan conventions, where they don't have a physical box location, but they go to all the fan conventions.
That's right. Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. I mean, obviously there is a role for Target and Walmart to play. It's not like they will do nothing with pop culture because it's mainstream, it's mass. So if a mom is going in and she's got 3 kids and she's got a certain budget and her kids are huge Marvel fans, it's much better to get t-shirts at Target than to walk into, a specific store that's going to sell a $60 t-shirt. But at the same time, if you're into, some type of game, and everybody's gathering, whether it's, Magic the Gathering or like whatever you're into, and, you want to be with people, go to your local retailer. And if your local retailer is hosting a competition, an event, you can go there, you can meet your friends, the shop is performing a function that's beyond, just selling product. And I think even libraries have a role. They do that quite well too. But now it's Corona time, so it's a little bit different.
No more gathering. Everybody gathers digitally.
No more gathering. No more conventions. Comic-Con is digital this year.
How do you feel about that? Like, are you planning on participating in any of the digital conventions, or are you planning to have your own? Because I've seen even a mix of both.
Well, we'll do panels. We already do live streams. We our marketing, our head of marketing, Kay Winters, is doing a live stream with Natalia Batista, who's an amazing artist out of Sweden, and they're doing a whole series of how to make manga for free, which is cool. The Comic-Con, we've applied for some panels, so hopefully we'll have those. It's not the same. I mean, Comic-Con without being in San Diego with a zillion people all cosplaying at the same time. I mean, it's a shame. It is a shame. And it's good that they're trying at least something, better than nothing. But, we just want the world to be, we want to be able to meet people and be in person again and go to
connect with your
con
family again, right? Everybody has a con family.
But I do have to say that I remember New York Comic Con last year. I remember we had our booth, our booth was in a good location, even though it was small. And so it was super crowded. And you had to go by, I don't know who was there, Konami and this and that. You had to get by certain booths to get to our booth. And it was super crowded. And I remember one time I went to go get food for the team, and I had 2 hands full of pizza and burgers and this and that. And, you buy this ridiculously expensive food at these places. And then there's nothing to cover them up. And I literally remember walking across, trying to make it through people, hoping nobody bashes into my food. And every now and then you hear someone cough right around you. No, please, germs, don't land in my food. And now I think about that with the context of, COVID-19, and it's oh my God, that you cannot have a convention like that with COVID out there.
Yeah, not in that respect, and not with that many people for sure. It's a new world, and we'll all have to adjust and figure out how that goes. But I have seen, although even other manufacturers actually create their own, for instance, Cryptozoic went ahead and had their own convention, and I might have them on actually to talk about how that went and in the context of virtual cons and stuff. But there's a few that have been popping up more and more, and I'm almost okay, how do I plan my time, right? There's too many to be able to try and tune into all of them.
Yeah. And honestly, doing Zoom, because now all my meetings are on Zoom, it's exhausting. If you do 10 Zooms in a day, it's physically draining with the screen and the listening. And, it's not easy. And you have to, I know my camera's there, but you're there. So am I looking at you or am I looking at the camera? It's not easy on the body.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to make your burden a little easier, and hopefully, we can end this pretty soon. But any predictions or any last minute, thoughts or words of wisdom, or anyone who wants to create a piece of content, anything you want to share as a closing?
Well, I'm very honored to have been able to be in this industry throughout my career. I love the fact I have a little boy right now, and he's just born. So he's 3 months old. He's a Corona baby. Aww. And I waited a bit late in my life to have a child, and now finally I have the most adorable boy on the planet. But I get to be a kid, for my job, which I feel very honored and blessed to do that. And I'm thankful for people to, even though, if I wanted to make tons of money, I would have gone into finance or big pharma or biotech or something. But we try to succeed financially and ups and downs. But because generally speaking, most of the time you're working really, really hard on spec for free. If you average it all out, even when you have a hit and something goes well, you're working for definitely less than minimum wage. And I think that that's kind of part of the cost that we pay in this business, in the content industry, to allow ourselves to have fun and act like kids for a living,
Yeah.
So
keeps us young.
It keeps us young. And I think, I guess Corona, because it's been tough for our company for sure. We've had massive cash flow problems. We've had to go through the government funding and get support and this and that. And we're just very, very thankful for every fan out there, for everybody that picks up a manga and enjoys it, for everybody that has the passion, for every artist that's creating, for every shop that's willing to take our product on, for every content owner in Japan or anywhere else in the world, big company, small company, that entrusts us to do our best with their content. The whole ecosystem up and down the chain is something that, even if it's changing a lot in this new world, there will always be an interest in great stories, always be characters, new characters that people are into. And we just want to spend the rest of our lives somehow being involved in that and being able to pay our bills.
Yeah. Have fun, but be able to be financially stable as well.
Yeah. We don't ask for much. We just want to be able to, go back to conventions, somehow pay for the $25 pizza and enjoy ourselves and meet fans.
And share it with our fans. Exactly. I love that part of it too. And that's the part I'm going to miss the most as well. So tell us where to find you. Where can we find Tokyopop and all the good stuff coming out?
Yeah, we're always very accessible. Definitely our website, tokyopop.com. We're on Instagram. We're on pretty much every social media. We tried 1 or 2 TikToks, but we haven't quite figured that one out yet. Snapchat, we don't really do that as a company either, just because we're small. We have limited resources. But the kind of traditional ones, Facebook, Insta, Twitter, we're there. YouTube, we have a little YouTube channel that we want to do more stuff with. And they're all kind of Tokyopop and all those things. But if you come to tokyopop.com, you can more or less find out everything.
Jump off from there, right?
Yeah.
Well, Stu, thank you so much for joining me for this time. I really appreciate it.
Anita,
I learned a lot. Definitely. This is really great. Maybe we'll do it again.
It's been tons of fun. My first ever Zoom live stream. It's been fantastic.
Well, thank you again. And thanks everybody for joining us. And we will see you again next Friday. Have a good rest of the day, everybody.
Bye, guys.